reflect on the close linkages between the HLPF's team and the realities and challenges that are faced at the subnational level. We look forward to learning more about the experiences and solutions, as well as the specific challenges at the local and subnational levels. Ladies and gentlemen, the nations and peoples of the world are currently facing the greatest socio-economic and development challenge since the creation of the United Nations. The COVID-19 pandemic has imposed unparalleled human suffering and has reversed hard-fought development gains of at least a decade. Achieving the SDGs and addressing the climate catastrophe have become much more challenging. More than ever, we need close cooperation with and partnership between all sectors of society, as well as among all member states. As President of the Economic and Social Council, I have worked with UN member states and other stakeholders on several fronts, including on mobilizing the financing required to respond to the pandemic and the sustainability to rebuild economies, for investments in sustainable infrastructure, and for the productive application of science and technology for growth and development. We need the leadership of local decision makers and their capacity to innovate, to drive change, to connect communities in order to chart a path towards a more sustainable, resilient future where no one is left behind. We need the ambition and concrete actions on the ground, especially at the local and subnational level, and for the United Nations, for governments and the private sector to work together with the local and subnational governments in different contexts and levels. I hope the discussion today will further reinforce our collective commitment to the universal realization of the 2030 Agenda, and I sincerely thank you for your participation. I wish you all great success at your event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for these thoughtful remarks. And we are now going to a video message from His Excellency Liu Zemin, Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Colleagues.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this fourth edition of the High-Level Local and Regional Government Forum, organized in connection with the United Nations High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. On behalf of UNDESA, I wish to recognize our partners from the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments, UN Habitat, UNDP, and Local 2030 for their great collaboration in today's event. I also take this opportunity to greet all participants who are connecting from all over the world today. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed our world profoundly, causing tragic loss of life, deep suffering, and economic hardship across the globe. The pandemic has set the world's progress towards sustainable development goals at grave risk, undermining years of development efforts. Local and regional governments around the world have been at the forefront combating the pandemic and its impacts. These past months have clearly demonstrated that we cannot have sustainable recovery and development without their efforts. Because of their direct link with the communities and the citizens, local and regional governments have a critical role in responding to the needs of the most vulnerable. This includes by ensuring that public services such as basic health, housing, education, clean energy, and water are functioning and safeguarded. The rapid expansion of social protection, the emergence of community resilience and development of unique partnerships at the local level have been truly inspiring to witness. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2019 United Nations SDG Summit committed to empowering and supporting the critical role of cities, local authorities, and communities in realizing the SDGs. An analysis of 2020 voluntary national reviews presented by member states at the high-level political forum last year showed that in many instances, the implementation of SDGs relies on concrete policies at the local level. As the Secretary of the high-level political forum, UNDESA is committed to ensuring robust monitoring and review of progress in SDG implementation at all levels. In this context, it is encouraging to see how the local and the subnational reviews, also known as voluntary local reviews, are picking up pace. And while the voluntary local reviews are not directly mandated by the 2030 agenda, these reviews have proven useful to drive localization and accelerating SDG implementation. They can also serve as an important collection of concrete examples of lessons learned and successful experiences. The voluntary local reviews processes can bring multiple benefits, such as to support more integrated policymaking and coordination, to serve as a catalyst for increased engagement with civil society, the private sector, and academia, to help enhance data collection, to serve as a communication tool between different levels of government, and to facilitate the search for new and innovative means of implementation. I'm pleased to share that UNDESA has created an online platform to compile and showcase those voluntary local reviews. We have also drafted global guiding elements for voluntary local reviews to support these efforts, building on those prepared for the voluntary national reviews. I invite you all look at these tools. UNDESA has also been collecting examples of SDG implementation efforts by all actors to shine the spotlight on practices that truly work and could be scaled up by others. For instance, the municipality of Lima in Peru has set up an initiative to support access to fresh foods during the COVID-19 outbreak. To date, over 3,000 families have been trained, ensuring vulnerable people's livelihoods and basic needs. In Deqing County, China, a rural digital government system has been set up to modernize agricultural production, improve farmers' digital literacy, and promote high-quality medical resources to the countryside. I take this opportunity to invite all of you to register your SDG acceleration actions through the digital online platform set up by UNDESA. We currently have more than 300 SDG acceleration actions registered by governments and stakeholders around the world, including 24 from local and regional governments. I will be looking toward to seeing more ambitious commitments from local and regional governments featured in this global data bank. Ladies and gentlemen, this executive action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, let us work together in solidarity to achieve sustainable development for all, leaving no one behind. I wish you all a successful event. I thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, for those kind words and for reminding us how important the voluntary local and voluntary subnational reviews are. We have a couple of days coming up that are going to be covering the progress in that field with events from the 14th to the 16th during this high-level political forum. I am delighted now to go to Honorable Jan van Zanen, Mayor of The Hague, co-president of United Cities and Local Governments and the representative of the Global Task Force here. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, dear friends. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to this 4th Local and Regional Governments Forum in the framework of the High-Level Political Forum. And let me especially thank the co-organizers for ensuring this vital space for our constituency every year, and to commend UNDP and UN Habitat for our important and ever-growing partnership, looking for a better future for our communities. For UCLG and the whole membership of the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments, this space and the growing support for localization it has inspired continues to be vital. This is the second time that we come together in this virtual format. The world continues to face trying times. As the conversations are adapting from the immediate response to include the views on what kind of world we will have in the coming years, it remains critical to ensure a recovery that is safe, inclusive, green, and just for all. Over the past month, we have come to realize how important our joint goals are and how necessary it is to develop policy and services with those in vulnerable situations. Our agenda is local and universal, and our constituency wants to ensure that this vision is embedded in the discussions here at the United Nations. In this sense, allow me to take a moment to commend the creation of the UN Task Force on the Future of Cities, an important step forward in the development of our common agenda and in the consideration of our spheres of government and the UN system. Throughout the worst of the pandemic, it has often been us, local and regional governments, supported by their associations, who work tirelessly at the front line to safeguard the rights and health of community through local public service delivery, underpinning health measures. We need a recovery that bears this fact in mind. In the coming years, to ensure a recovery that works for all, we need to support and strengthen frameworks of public services as a cornerstone of urban health. We will need to redefine what is essential by building a framework of equality and inclusion, a framework of co-creation collaboration between stakeholders, one that includes everyone in decision-making processes, including migrant and displaced populations, women and persons with disabilities. We need a democratic recovery, one that includes everyone, to truly leave no one behind. Dear friends, the new normal cannot tread the same path that we were on. As we define the packages for the recovery, we need to do so in a way they promote a sustainable economy, green infrastructures, and public services that create opportunities for all, that reduce the environmental impact of cities and territories, and in line with the ecological transformation that our planet requires. Our constituency is aware that priorities are no longer the same. We're engaged in discussions to bring to light the new essentials. A world that enables women and girls to be represented in all facets of public life. A world in which technology is led by people and managed democratically. A world of redesigned cities with sustainable basic services frameworks and territories planned with everyone in mind, so everyone can live their lives with dignity. We need a renewed multilateral system that fosters the local global localization movement and that acknowledges our role as lever for transformation. Our commitment to play a part in the localization of the global agendas is both a testimony to our commitment to development, but also the proof that local and global destinies are closely intertwined and that the inhabitants of our cities and towns are global citizens whose aspirations can only be served and protected through cohesion and solidarity. As expressed in the annual localization report that we presented last Friday, our commitment to local and subnational reporting keeps growing, with VLRs doubling from 2020 to 2021 and 15 VSRs being developed in the last years. We need more, and we need more recognition of the local action in the VNRs. We need a high-level political forum to further acknowledge the potential of local and territorial action that aids in promoting local democracy and empowers local and regional governments to deliver together the goals we set for ourselves and reflects the realities on the ground. Your Excellencies, dear mayors, dear friends, let me close by reiterating the commitment of our organized constituency of the 27 local and regional government organizations gathered within the Global Task Force to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals as we know them. Carry on.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor. Indeed, a large constituency delegation for this high-level political forum, over 200 delegates over this week, and 70 elected officials. Thank you very much for your testimony on behalf of the Global Task Force. And I am delighted now to give the floor to Her Excellency Ulrika Modier, UN Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Assistant Administrator, and Director of the Bureau of External Relations and Advocacy of UNDP. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And yes, let's carry on, Excellencies and colleagues. And let me start by commending both local and regional governments for their steadfast hold of the front lines in the global struggle with the COVID-19 pandemic and looking how to make investments that takes us beyond recovery towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is, as we know in this forum, and as we need to tell the world, the local level where the aggregate numbers we read in the reports play out and hit hard. The 4 million lives we've lost have names and faces in their local communities. And the more than 100 million made poor by the pandemic lean on the services and support made accessible at local centers and agencies. And the 239 million we project to require life-saving humanitarian support this year, the increasing number, they will be relying on local systems and actors working closely with their national governments and international organizations and institutions. It is in this role at the front line, as government closest to the people and as government able to take the local and the global and vice versa, that establishes local governments as essential in securing a recovery and a future that is inclusive, that is sustainable, and also resilient. Excellencies and colleagues, recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is not a phase that follows like a sequence, the peak of any development that we would like to see. It's a continuum mutation and an uneven vaccine rollout that indicates a scenario that requires us to plan for the infinite circulation of the virus and to address its urgent and long-term differentiated impact throughout time. Let me raise to you today 3 key messages for jointly reflection. Firstly, recovery and SDG acceleration are not separate processes. They are one indivisible priority to secure a sustainable future for all humanity. The crisis, unlike any we have seen in the United Nations' 75-year history, has unraveled decades of development gains, and the regress across SDGs underline the vulnerabilities that we must address without delay. Looking at some SDGs under review this year, we can note that the SDG 1 on poverty, people in poverty, has actually increased for the first time in 20 years to 163 million this year. And the extreme poor could reach 1 billion in 2030 if economic recovery is protracted. Looking at SDG 2 on hunger, 957 million people in 93 countries today do not have enough to eat, and 239 million this year alone will need humanitarian support to live. Another SDG 3 on health, basic rights, disruptions to basic health services delivery increased deaths from both malaria in sub-Saharan Africa by 100%, and hundreds of thousands more of children may die before they reach the age of 5. And then, of course, looking at SDG 10, as we need to do increasingly across the world, within countries, between countries. SDG 10 on inequalities. The pandemic, as we know, hit the most vulnerable the hardest, and the differentiated impact of the pandemic continues in the vaccine inequality playing out today as we speak. Our efforts need to go beyond the immediate palliative return to normal and aim to eradicate the very things that render whole communities, societies, and economics vulnerable. Secondly, we need to keep in mind that the local dimensions of global trends and challenges are with us, and we need to ensure the multi-level governance and coordination that serves all communities across the local to global continuum. Local action and SDG localization are not mechanisms for guaranteeing spaces for local actors, but rather processes for ensuring local global alignment on priorities that affect us all, for anchoring local communities at the core of what we do. And the voluntary local and subnational reviews are, of course, very valuable in this regard. Everyone should look closer at them and learn from them. Thirdly, we need to build local capacities for a future tied to global shifts. All levels of governments have been seriously affected by the pandemic, but local governments emerge as the front line of crisis management during the pandemic, as I mentioned in the beginning. And in many countries, they are the responsible for many of the services and operations supported by local revenues, and they have borne pressures to an extent never seen before, and support is needed. I look forward to hear the recommended action of local communities around the world throughout this forum. The recovery trends point to a long period of uncertainty. This is what we see with UNDP. But the strong resolve of communities from the local to the global, we will see to that we can get humanity back on track towards 2030. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for those thoughtful remarks and for acknowledging the important role that local and regional governments have been playing during this pandemic and that will need to be playing for a new future, a renewed, better normal. I am now very pleased to welcome Her Excellency Maimouna Moudsharif, UN Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Human Settlements Program. Welcome, Maimouna. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Thank you very much, and Mr. Akram, President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, Mr. Liu, Under Secretary General of Economic and Social Affairs, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, Ms. Ulrika, Assistant Secretary General of UNDP, Mayor Van Zenen, Mayor of The Hague of the Netherlands, Excellencies, distinguished speakers, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon from UN Habitat, Nairobi, Kenya. It is a very great honor and privilege for me to join the opening of the local and regional governments forum. I also would like to take a moment to share my condolences at the passing of the Mayor Geoffrey Makubo, Mayor of Johannesburg, a long-time colleague and friend, a leader and visionary. Along with him, my thoughts go to all victims of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been unprecedented in at least a generation at its scale and impact. So since its first edition in 2018, the local and regional governments forum has become a central moment in convening the local government's constituency and in elevating its voice within the HLPF and more broadly in a global debate on sustainability. In addition, the forum has traditionally been a stage for multi-level and multi-stakeholders exchanges, and I am therefore glad to see many national governments and amongst the panelists, along with representatives from civil society and the private sector. So, Excellencies, partners, and friends, none of us will be able to overcome the unprecedented challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic alone. We are all in this together. If we want to be successful in recovering from the crisis and transforming our world and societies for the better, all levels of governance, from international to local, must join hands and work in harmony towards the same goals. For this to happen, we need to place communities and territories at the center of recovery and support local governments with the adequate frameworks, means, and resources. The pandemic has shown us the importance of local and regional policy making, planning, and public service provision, critical to preserve our community's health, safety, and well-being, and the cornerstones on which the recovery should be based. Addressing the pandemic requires a granular approach as the crisis affects different urban neighborhoods and community groups differently. Localized action is also essential for the full achievement of the SDGs. Indeed, 65% of the SDG targets will not be reached without proper engagement of local and regional governments. So, Excellencies, partners, and friends, I would like to stress 3 points and 3 opportunities we have ahead. Number 1, the new urban agenda represents a key catalyst and accelerator for the SDGs. We will review the progresses made in achieving the new urban agenda and in contributing to the urban dimension of the SDGs in April 2022 during the high-level meeting of the General Assembly. The roadmap leading to that event is going to be an important opportunity for local and regional governments to highlight their work and enunciate their positions. 2, we are at the cusp of a new era for the multilateral system. Local governments need to be at its core. Many processes are in place for local action and SDG localization to be more and more central. The UN Task Force on the Future Cities and also the United Nations Advisory Committee on Local Authorities, among others, provide local governments with the opportunity to strengthen their international positioning. Let's engage and let's reinforce this mechanism to further connect the UN and the multilateral system to the local level. My third message and opportunities is that the local governments will be at the center of the new Local 2030 coalitions, hosted by UN Habitat and co-chaired by UN Habitat and UNDP. The Local 2030 coalition will be a new revamped UN-wide initiative for localizing the SDGs, with a prominent role of the Global Task Force on Local and Regional Governments. The coalition will bring together national and local governments, business and academia to join hands and resources for the localization of the SDGs. This coalition will be launched in September during the SDG moment. So, Excellencies, colleagues, and partners, let me conclude by congratulating all the partners that tirelessly work to organize of this forum, and thanking all the speakers that will animate the debate in the next 2 days. So UN Habitat, as the UN agencies leading the work with local government, stands ready to work with you, and I invite all participants and institutions present today to join forces with us to support and strengthen the local government movement worldwide and make the SDGs a reality for all, leaving no one and no place behind. And I wish you all a very fruitful event. Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. Over to you, Amelia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for those encouraging and passionate words. And thank you for reminding us that we cannot leave anyone and also no place behind. And in that very spirit, we are going now to the next segment. As you know, we have 2 sessions before us, one today and one tomorrow. During this the session today, we will be covering local public service and good health and well-being, and also another panel on reducing inequalities and fostering social inclusion. We are going to start with the first panel that is going to be facilitated by the able hands of Ms. Lara Blanco, Deputy Director of Sustainable Development Unit in the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General. I wish you all the best, Lara, and thank you for these past months of partnership and co-creation.
Thank you very much, Emilia. And first of all, congratulations to all the co-partners and organizers of this forum. It is an honor for me to be able to facilitate this first panel. So, Excellencies, distinguished speakers, dear colleagues and friends, welcome to the first panel of the 4th edition of the Local and Regional Governments Forum. Allow me to share my warm greetings, especially to all the participants, speakers on behalf of the Executive Office of the Secretary General, the Local 2030 Coalition, and the UN-wide Initiative on Localizing the SDGs. So the title of this session is Local Public Services and Good Health and Well-being, as Emilia rightly said. We will have the honor to hear the perspective of 6 speakers. We have a tight agenda because we are meant to finalize by 9:15. These speakers come from around the globe and will speak about the central issues of public services. Most importantly, what we are going to do now is that we are going to be looking at the intrinsic link between local public service provision and health systems, and the importance that these services play in protecting people, the planet, and fostering prosperity and care for all. As COVID-19 brought light to the essential role that local and regional governments and public service provision has, it also brought to the fore the structural deprivations and inequalities that existed in our societies and that are deeply rooted in our urban settings as well. Millions turned and still rely on their closest level of government, their local authorities and their frontline staff. People seek guidance, support, and responses to the threats posed by the pandemic. And SDG 3 needs an effective public service for successful implementation. So we're going to be listening to the voices of local governments and engaging in structural dialogue with local governments and other actors. I'm happy to say that already in the high-level political forum last week, we heard consistently about the important role of local governments, and we saw this productive engagement between different actors. But local public services need to be one of the cornerstones of the recovery process and mitigate the impact of other potential future crises, and they need all of our support. So let's hear about the experiences of these 6 speakers. I will pass the word to our first speaker of the day, the head of the Sakha Republic, Mr. Aysen Nikolayev. Mr. Nikolayev, you have the floor.
Уважаемые коллеги, для меня огромная честь выступать сегодня на нашем форуме по повестке дня в области устойчивого развития до 2030 года. Якутия является крупнейшим регионом России. Мы имеем площадь 3 миллиона квадратных километров, где проживает чуть менее миллиона человек. Более половины площади у нас занимает территория Арктики. Последние 1,5 года мы вместе со всем миром, конечно же, переживаем очень серьезные, невиданные ранее вызовы, связанные с COVID-19. За это время мы все пришли к пониманию, что насколько уязвимой может быть человечество и наша глобальная система перед новыми проблемами. Вместе с тем, пандемия COVID-19, на мой взгляд, стала триггером совершенно иных подходов к защите общественного здоровья, как ключевого достояния наций, как важнейшего фактора устойчивости сообществ и экономики. Позвольте очень кратко рассказать о тех инициативах, которые мы начали реализовывать в Якутии, определив сбережение и приумножение здоровья наших жителей ключевым приоритетом на предстоящий год. Учитывая безусловную важность здоровья жителей для благополучия нынешних и будущих поколений, я объявил время с 2021 года по 2030 год десятилетием здоровья в Республике Саха-Якутия. Задачи на это десятилетие поставлены масштабные. Прежде всего, это формирование новой культуры общественного здоровья, мотивация каждого жителя к ответственному отношению к своему здоровью. Важнейшее направление – это развитие современной системы здравоохранения, ориентированной на человека, учитывающей условия жизни в самом суровом климате на планете. В том числе это создание персонализированной модели медицинской помощи, развитие высокотехнологичной медицины, профилактики и реабилитации. Новый уровень развития и прямого участия науки в охране здоровья, в сохранении генофонда коренных народов Якутии, в том числе коренных малочисленных народов, также ключевая задача – десятилетие здоровья. В условиях пандемии ключевое значение приобрело цифровизация медицинских услуг. В том числе это расширение системы удаленного медицинского консультирования. За прошлый год у нас в этой системе проведено 20 тысяч видеоконсультаций. Телемедицинская сеть у нас будет развиваться и дальше. Уже в этом году мы создали цифровую платформу «Здоровая Якутия» с широким спектром цифровых услуг в сфере охраны здоровья, в том числе для диспансерного наблюдения за теми людьми, которые переболели ковидом. В ближайшее время мы запускаем национальный биобанк, расширяющий возможности генетических исследований и диагностики наследственных заболеваний. Проектов у нас немало, включая аспекты кадровой политики в медицине, создание условий для круглогодичной физической активности наших граждан, организации здорового питания. Словом, на колоссальных территориях, миллионы квадратных километров, в самых отдаленных наших районах, мы должны сделать так, чтобы жителям нашим в полной мере были доступны современные методы профилактики, ранней диагностики и лечения заболеваний. Тот же опыт и те глубокие изменения, с которыми мы столкнулись из-за ковида, они позволяют извлечь ценные уроки. Понимая и принимая здоровье в широком понимании этого смысла, мы, безусловно, имеем в виду не только физическое, но и социально-духовное благополучие и здоровую среду жизни человека. Уверен, сейчас наступило время активного использовать потенциал местных региональных властей, определить новую повестку, которая учитывала бы опыт борьбы с масштабными вызовами, такими как пандемия COVID-19 или глобальное изменение климата, и уникальные условия конкретных территорий. С этой целью мы создаем в Якутии Совет по благополучию и устойчивому развитию при главе республики, совет, в который я пригласил авторитетных экспертов, в том числе с мировым именем из разных других стран. Он призван выработать путь устойчивого развития, учитывающий особенности региона, климатические, географические, демографические и культурные факторы. Мы надеемся, что выработанные подходы, наши эффективные проекты могут быть масштабированы в северных арктических регионах всего мира, где исходные условия жизни сопоставимы с нашими. Уважаемые друзья, я искренне благодарю вас за внимание. Мы готовы к самому широкому сотрудничеству в рамках повестки дня в области устойчивого развития до 2030 года и локализации целей устойчивого развития. Всем желаю здоровья и успехов.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nikolajev. Let me now turn to the chairperson of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, Reverend Morat Gomo. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lara. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be joining this event today and to be able to gather such a diverse group of local and regional government voices at the high-level political forum, albeit virtually this time. As a movement and as a collective of local government partners, we have shifted the dial now. We are increasingly being properly recognized as an integral part of the state, and therefore a partner in global dialogue around key issues and challenges facing the world. I hope that this meeting will demonstrate that further in the context of the COVID recovery. As local and regional governments, we have been at the front line in dealing with the COVID-19. And therefore, if we want to ensure an inclusive recovery with people at the center of it, we have an important role to play as local and regional governments. Globally, 4 million people have already died from COVID. Many are suffering the long-term effects of the virus, and the further 120 million more people have been pushed into poverty. This only reinforces how important it is that we reinforce and hasten progress towards meeting the SDGs. Our shared goal, global targets for people, prosperity on the planet. Even before COVID, we were not on track to meet the goals. So it has never been more important for us to join hands as a sector with other spheres of government and with civil society and the private sector to accelerate progress towards reducing inequality and achieving the goals. We have to make the multi-level expressing the agenda and minimizing a harmful impact on the planet. The pandemic has thrown into stark relief of the growing inequalities. We have seen local governments step up during the pandemic, deliver and maintain key basic services to safeguard lives, health, and livelihoods in the most challenging of circumstances. Public services, such as primary health care provision, water, waste management, sanitation, and therefore making sure markets can open, poor relief and community outreach are all local services and critical to ensuring healthy cities and communities. COVID-19 has also emphasized how interconnected we are. We know that local and regional governments must be part of this recovery. As you know, UCLG has just published its latest annual review towards the localization of SDGs on behalf of and support of the Global Task Force members. The report highlights global examples of good practices in localizing SDGs response to health challenges. It also reflects a mixed picture with less involvement of local and regional governments in preparing voluntary national reviews. In all regions except for Europe and Asia Pacific, we want to take this transformational moment to ensure local voices are driving the recovery. Local voices are driving the recovery and the kind of development our communities want. Our report calls for align global, regional, national, and local development strategies more closely. Local and regional governments' role in national coordination mechanisms. Ensure and enhance local and regional governments' role in multilateral decision-making. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in summation, local public services are central to health and well-being.
I think we lost our speaker. Is it the case for everyone, or it's only me that is having problems here?
He is having problems, Lara, so I suggest we go to the next one. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So sorry for that. So we will try to see if he reconnects. We're moving then to the mayor of Polokwane, president of Salga, South Africa, Tembisile Karimen. Yes. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Let me start by greeting all my excellencies, the Excellency, the President of the United Economic and Social Council, His Excellency Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Zenmin, UNNPP Administrator, Mr. Steiner, and our UN Habitat Executive Director, Ms. Sharif, Director of City Alliance, Dr. Greg Munro, representatives of the United Nations, dear Mayor Van Zanen and representatives of the Global Task Force, and everybody who has individually joined us from different corners of the world today. All protocol is observed. Allow me to take this moment to join your colleagues, as some who have come before me, to honor the memory of the Mayor of the City of Johannesburg, Mr. Geoff Makhubo, a fellow mayor, a fellow local government combatant, a South African to the core, and a champion for local government. And of course, a champion of the rights of all the people, no matter where they come from. This pandemic has and is still continuing to cost us daily. It is costing us lives, it has costed us jobs, and has brought an incredible stress to our systems of service delivery. What is more, the crisis stemming from COVID-19 pandemic has shown the intrinsic link between local public service provision and the health systems, the importance that these services play in protecting people, the planet, but also fostering prosperity and caring for all. So local and regional government, sustainable policy making has been critical to preserve our community's safety, linking health systems, public services, and the universal development agendas. Basic services are essential, and yet they're at a precarious state at the time in which we are, and in many cities and regions all over the world. Local service delivery around the world is in jeopardy if the adequate means are put in place and promptly. We are still dealing in South Africa and in many other countries with the worst pandemic. Nevertheless, our vaccination is advancing, and the conversation to address such a recovery needs to include the local and regional governments, and we must make sure that our voice is directional and clear. It is time to adequately resource and support our public service, in particular to ensure universal health care around the world. It is more urgent than ever to honor the commitment of making vaccines a global public good through collaboration between the public and the public sector. The recovery will be local, or it will not be there, or it will not be available. It needs to place local and regional governments at the center. Local financing and resourcing needs to be at the core, and we will never be able to maintain basic services, let alone build back the better lives that we had. Only with a recovery that is people-centered and develops an economic system of basic services can we rise to the challenge and fully fund our education system to avoid leaving the millions that have dropped out from classes today to be part of the risk of falling below the minimum reading proficiency level. Packages for recovery need to promote sustainable economy, infrastructure, and public services to create opportunities for all. Only then will we say we have developed the capacity to face the digital age, to bridge the digital divide, and to skill our workers for the future of the labor market. A recovery that is people-centered, that builds on local capacities in the system of their cities. In this same high-level political forum, just a few days ago, I was honored to argue in a panel that engaged local and regional governments. And I ask, which I do again today, how the international system could support us for the need to redefine our systems of decision-making and implementation to build on local capacities. I call again, as I called then, for the acknowledgement of local involvement in the voluntary national reviews processes, for the recognition of the voluntary local reviews and the VSRs, not just as a contributions for our local government, but also as a show of our commitment and as a political tool to drive ownership of the goals that we have all aspired to achieve. I would like to highlight the importance of strengthening coordination mechanisms and including local and regional recovery. Our statement delivered to the HLPF that many colleagues from the Global Task Force have already addressed highlights the many reasons why, as local and regional governments, we are essential not just for equitable recovery, but for the localization of the SDGs. Allow me to echo these words as my own, as well as we call for the equality-driven system that fully engages our local and regional governments and the association for the international systems and national governments to promote the necessary reforms to strengthen the role and resources of local regional governments. I would like to end by reiterating our commitment to the localization of the universal development agendas to ensure that all people are protected and that no one is left behind, and that we can rebuild our relationship with ourselves, with our governments, and with our planet in a sustainable and durable way. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those words. Allow me now to turn over to Carolina Cose, Mayor of Montevideo, please. Over to you, Mayor.
Muchísimas gracias. La verdad que quisiera agradecer a UNDESA, al Grupo de Trabajo Global de Gobiernos Locales y Regionales, a ONU Habitat y al PNUD la invitación para participar en este cuarto foro de gobiernos locales y regionales, que creo se ha constituido el principal espacio para compartir acciones de localización. Ya en este 2021, nuestra Montevideo presentó su primer informe local voluntario en torno al ODS 5 de igualdad de género, al ODS 6, agua limpia y saneamiento, y al ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades, y al ODS 11, ciudades y comunidades sostenibles. Anunciamos hoy entonces y ratificamos nuestro compromiso para presentar las acciones clave de las metas previstas para el 2030, en las que avanzaremos en la adecuación institucional y en la agenda a partir de las prioridades del desarrollo de Montevideo. Presentaremos un nuevo informe voluntario en este 2022. Desde Montevideo hemos adaptado y desarrollado nuevos servicios para seguir apoyando a nuestras comunidades sin dejar a nadie atrás. La Intendencia de Montevideo cuenta con decenas de policlínicas barriales en los territorios y con varias unidades móviles de atención primaria a la salud y de vacunación. Hemos desarrollado en esta pandemia especialmente un abordaje territorial profundo de atención a enfermos de COVID en los territorios, de atención de acciones preventivas y de promoción de la salud. Pero cuando hablamos de salud, no podemos dejar de vincularla con los derechos fundamentales de los seres humanos. La enfermedad es un tema de los médicos, pero la salud es un tema de Estado. Por lo tanto, hemos desarrollado, desde que asumimos este gobierno en noviembre del 2020, un plan específico que se llama Plan ABC, basado en 5 ejes en ese sentido. alimentación, trabajo, salud, territorios e igualdad. Y estos 5 ejes despliegan acciones que están en línea con varios ODS, el ODS 3, el 5, el 2, el 10 y el 11. Creemos que la pandemia ha llamado especialmente la atención sobre los espacios públicos como espacios de salud. Y creo que a partir de la pandemia el urbanismo ya no será lo mismo. La cultura ya no será lo mismo. La cultura, como dice el poema, es necesaria como el pan de cada día y debe adaptarse para poder seguir llegando a la mayor cantidad de personas y para construir entre todos el alma de nuestra sociedad. En este mundo post-COVID, quizás pase a ser la salud el eje central de la construcción de la política a nivel mundial. Quizás, ojalá, las políticas de salud desplacen o sean la inspiración de nuevas políticas económicas, porque defender la salud es defender la vida, y defender la vida es el objetivo principal de la política, que es la mejor forma de organizarnos que hemos encontrado los seres humanos hasta ahora. Muchísimas gracias y cuenten con el compromiso de Montevideo para seguir andando.
Muchísimas gracias por esas palabras. Let me now turn over to also Jorge Muñoz Wells, Mayor of Lima. Adelante, por favor.
Bien, muchas gracias. Muy buenos días desde Lima. Un gusto poder estar con todos ustedes. También tenemos el reto de cumplir con los 4 minutos, como nos ha señalado Lara Blanco. Y voy a tratar de ser muy conciso para poder explicar la importancia que tienen los gobiernos locales dentro de lo que son las metas o cumplimientos de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. El primer punto es que en el año 2015 se hizo una medición y se decía que el 65% de las metas de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible no se cumplirían si no se involucraba a los gobiernos locales, y por ello este involucramiento es muy importante. Nos toca hablar sobre el Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible 3, pero todos los objetivos de desarrollo se tocan entre sí y hay una correlación muy importante que yo quiero destacar entre el Objetivo 3, el 11, que es lo que nos corresponde desde una perspectiva territorial a nosotros como ciudades, y lo que estamos haciendo en estos momentos, estas alianzas de importancia que nos potencian para poder ser todavía más impactantes en nuestro objetivo de cumplimiento de los objetivos, a su vez, de desarrollo sostenible. Quiero mencionar que Lima se suma a la presentación de informes locales voluntarios y vamos a ser la 5ª ciudad latinoamericana en poder estar presentando estos informes locales voluntarios. Y en ese sentido, quería compartir con ustedes también que tenemos una serie de acciones a nivel de salud, pero voy a hablar de 5 de estos puntos que son los más importantes que estamos trabajando. El primero, como quiera que nuestra sociedad o nuestra ciudad tiene una fuerte incidencia en anemia infantil, estamos trabajando para niñas y niños de menos de 36 meses, un programa para combatir la anemia y buscar que se puedan revertir los números tan negativos que tenemos. Hoy ya tenemos capacitados a más de 14.000 madres, padres o ciudadanos que han participado en esto. Pero dentro de lo que es la pandemia, algo que ha cobrado una importancia muy grande es un programa que se llama Lima Te Cuida. Si bien es cierto, la municipalidad no es una autoridad sanitaria como hay en otras partes, en otros lugares, estamos colaborando intensamente con la autoridad sanitaria que es el Ministerio de Salud. Y con este programa Lima Te Cuida, que tiene elementos de georreferenciación, se sabe dónde hay más necesidad para poder actuar desde una perspectiva sanitaria. Y en ese sentido, lo que se hace son llegar con pruebas de descarte para poder saber si existe o no el COVID y a partir de ese momento comenzar a armar una serie de estrategias. Rápidamente menciono que una de las cosas que también hemos hecho durante esta época es la creación de nuevos albergues. Un albergue importante es la Casa de Todos, que se utilizó en un espacio donde tradicionalmente se realizaban corridas de toros. Ahí se hizo en la Plaza de Hacho, que es una plaza que tiene muchos años de historia. Ahí se hizo un albergue temporal que hoy en día ya lo hemos transformado en otro lugar como un albergue definitivo. Estamos también, como tercer punto, trabajando, o como cuarto punto ya, perdón, trabajando lo que son las ollas comunes, que es ir a lugares donde hay mucha necesidad de comida, de alimentación, y capacitando a la comunidad para que lo que la comunidad hace en esos espacios y la consecución de comida para poder alimentar a las personas pueda tener una sostenibilidad en el tiempo y que pueda llegar a la mayor cantidad de personas en esas zonas. Y por último, algo que no está exento de relación con todo esto que venimos mencionando, es que hemos desarrollado un plan de acción climático. Por primera vez Lima tiene un plan de acción climático que va a ayudar a poder tener también muchísima conectividad con los temas de salud en la ciudad. Tenemos varias otras cosas más, pero por temas de tiempo me voy a ceñir solamente a estas y finalizar diciendo que renovamos nuestro compromiso de trabajo para poder lograr las metas de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor alcalde. Le agradecemos muchísimo por su presentación. Allow me now to turn over to the president of the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities, Mr. Bjorn Anil Gram. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Chair. Excellencies, dear friends and colleagues, public services are at the heart of local and regional governments. A fair, transparent, and effective provision of healthcare and well-being services is crucial in a modern and sustainable society. The COVID-19 pandemic has created an unprecedented situation and tested our national and global systems for intragovernmental dialogue, collaboration, and seamless service delivery across tiers of government. In my country, Norway, the municipalities have, in accordance with the law, high degree of authority when it comes to infection control. And in this pandemic, local authorities have been instrumental in keeping the level of contamination low through implementing local measures and undertaking contact tracing and testing, as well as vaccination, in addition to ensuring that citizens are informed and taken care of. The system of local responsibility actually works. It ensures tailor-made measures dependent on the infection situation, which varies in time and across the country. And local authorities can also, like no others, involve and build partnerships with the civil society and local organizations. But of course, this localized infection control strategy also rests upon trust and close dialogue between the government and local authorities, national financing, and so on. I think that lessons learned through this pandemic also can be at help when we move forward. First, municipalities and regions will be key partners of national governments for the restoration of the economy, service provision, social life, and normal democratic functions after the pandemic. And second, when we seek to fulfill SDG 3 on good health and well-being, the municipalities, with their knowledge of the local situation and varying needs between their inhabitants, as well as their ability to mobilize civil society, they are crucial in developing effective, smart, and sustainable services. And then again, national government must ensure the local and regional authorities' capability to do their important part of the job. In Norway, within a well-developed system of universal health coverage and access to quality healthcare for all, we work with this multi-level governance approach to ensure seamless healthcare services across tiers of government. Good dialogue with a system of consultations between the municipal sector and the national government is a key tool for this. And accordingly, Norway has this year undertaken voluntary reviews of how we are working towards a sustainable future at both the national, subnational, and local level. It's quite clear that SDG 3 and most of the other goals only can be met with the strong involvement and action of local and regional authorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're moving to our last speaker, Rosa Pavanielli, Secretary General of PSI. Over to you, please.
Greetings to all of you, and thanks for inviting me once again to this meeting. I think it's important to remind you all that a safe and full recovery from the pandemic and the achievement of the SDGs will remain only a wish if we don't speak about those who are delivering the service that your administrations are committed to do. And therefore, the voice of workers is very much important in this context. It's not the first time that we participate reciprocally in our meetings. It's a very well-established cooperation we have with UCLG in Public Services International. And I think that our common commitment to enhance the quality of jobs, the quality of employment in public services can be considered as part of the sustainable recovery and the plan to achieve sustainable development goals. We saw the impact of unpreparedness during the pandemic. It has been reminded in some of the presentation. The WHO estimates 114,000 health workers dying during their job due to COVID. We do not have the figures for workers in other services, also because many of those services have been outsourced, and it's hard to collect information. So preparedness has to be part of the recovery, and decent jobs, decent working conditions, and collective bargaining has to be part of the recovery plans. We do believe that public services owned publicly and delivered publicly performed much better than privatized services. And our commitment to strengthening public services has to be shared with you. Of course, we need resources. We are all witnessing this possible agreement within the G20 for a minimum global tax for corporates and the wealth, which will bring money to our countries. We do believe that it has to be just a beginning. We need more resources, and we need more justice and equity to pay for the recovery and for sustainable communities. But one important thing is that we together, we can claim for part of those resources to be allocated to local government, because there is where services has to be provided. And also quality and decent jobs can rely on resources that has to be shared among our communities, not centralized. I think that this can be part of a common initiative that we can lead in the future and in preparation of this G20 agreement, and can be probably part of strengthening the joint statement that we are posting. We had with UCLG and PSI with the common goals we want to achieve, and possibly look how we can transform this joint statement in concrete initiatives that we can have at regional and local level where the conditions are given. Finally, I wanted to share with you the manifesto for the redesigning of care services that we endorsed as PSI, because we do believe that the care system has to be at the heart, at the center of local government initiatives, as it showed to be the most important part of inclusiveness for millions of people around the world during the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pavanili. And let me then thank all the speakers that have reminded us about the importance of a culture of public health, about the need for this to be inclusive and to ensure that local voices lead the recovery, which means information, for reminding us also about the power of the digital and the possibilities that we find there. Clearly, as many of you have said, the pandemic is ongoing and you are still in the front line. Efforts are underway to vaccinate all the population, and there are challenges that are long-term. We heard our last speaker mentioning the communique coming out of the G20. There's momentum. Lately, we have seen the recognition of of the role of local governments and regional authorities, not only in that communique, but in other very important documents coming out around the discussions of the COVID pandemic. Clearly, the participation of local governments is important also in broader discussions around the response and the recovery, and the Secretary General is committed to strengthening the engagement of the local governments and regional authorities with the UN. I just want to highlight as well the importance of fair and transparent provision of service delivery, as was mentioned also by one of you, which is key also to retain trust necessary for adherence to values in support of human rights, but also support to institutions, both local and national institutions. And of course, the support that frontline workers still need in delivering those services, the importance of quality of jobs in public services, and the recognition of the impact that the pandemic has had in the lives, health of these frontline workers and that of their families. So allow me then, Emilia, to go back to you, thanking all the speakers and thanking all the participants for this very good discussion. Over.
Thank you, Lara, for a very good job, and thank you everybody for keeping time. And it has been really a very productive time. The panel has put through many good ideas. We are going to make all preparations for our second panel of this local and regional governments forum that is going to be focusing on reducing inequalities and fostering social inclusion and prosperity. And in order to have the backstage ready, we propose to you a quick video with a very short break. Don't go anywhere. You will be able to see some of the findings of our annual localization report, and we will be back in a minute with Greg Munro, who is going to be facilitating this second panel. Thank you again, Lara. Thank you, mayors. Thank you, partners. Well, welcome back, and thank you for the speakers of the previous panels. As you can see from the video, many messages full of hope, of vision from local and regional governments. You have seen the links that have been shared from our annual report, but also from our joint statements as constituency to this high-level political forum. And we are now starting to get ready to get back to this second panel of the high-level political forum, local and regional governments forum, 4th edition. I am going to introduce to you our dear colleague, Greg Munro, one of our own. He used to be the director of the Commonwealth Local Governments Forum and is currently the director of a very important partner and partnership for local governments around the world, Cities Alliance. This panel is going to be looking at reducing inequalities and fostering social inclusion and prosperity. And a very interesting lineup you have as well, Greg. I give you the floor now, and I will keep you posted on any updates from speakers. The floor is yours, and thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you, Emilia, and good morning, good afternoon, excellencies and colleagues, all protocol observed. If COVID has done one thing for our approach to development, it has shown us firstly how vulnerable we are as a society, and secondly, how integrated we are, that we are one integrated society and we will succeed or fail together. We have seen widespread collapse in informal economies and how dependent formal economies are on the informal economy. We've seen over 100 million people pushed back into poverty. We have seen how many people in our world lived just one meal away from hunger. We've seen widespread food insecurity, and we've seen women bearing the brunt of the economic effects of COVID. And of course, migration will increase as an escape from the increased poverty. COVID has pushed us backwards. And now more than ever, we need to say that we are in this together. We succeed together or fail together, as I said. We therefore need integration, social inclusion, and collectiveness of action, and hence this session. Let us relook at what are some of the basic SDGs. SDG 1 is no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, and SDG 10 on reducing inequalities. Like the last session, we have a number of our local and regional government leaders around the world in our panel today. They will give us their perspectives on reducing inequalities and fostering social inclusion and prosperity in the achievement of our 2030 agenda and in the context of the COVID pandemic. Can I ask our speakers, because we have 8, to please limit their time to 4 to 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes. And because I can see her right in front of me on the screen, can I go straight to Carola Gunnarsson, Mayor of Sala, Sweden, to open the session? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. And thank you for providing me and CMR Platforma with this opportunity to take part in today's discussion. To reduce inequalities, we need to address the urgent problems, but above all, we must work preventively. We must work hard to build sustainable societies where democracy, human rights, and gender equality are the foundation and the solid ground that we build upon. We need political strategies for this, but above all, we need a political will to change. We need tools and we need to act. Data and facts are important tools when we bring the issues of gender equality to the table. The number shows clearly that women's representation in decision-making and leadership positions are strongly underrepresented. In Europe, for example, it will take 107 years to close the gender gap in political empowerment at the current rate of progress. Our political assemblies must reflect the society. Studies shows that the threats to elected women are greater than for men, and defections are greater among women. Violence and harassment against women politicians drives women away from politics as a vocation and contributes to the continuing gender gap and underrepresentation of women in politics. It's time for everyone to take their responsibility in stopping harassment and violence against women elected representatives. We must together create safe and inclusive spaces for decision-making. CMR and members are this year celebrating not only 70 years of European Cooperation of Solidarity, but also 15 years of the European Charter for Equality. That's the reference tool and framework for creating gender equality, starting with our own towns and regions. On the same topic, UCLG Africa with the REFELA is also building its own charter with the support of UCLG and CMR. It demonstrates that when we all work together from one continent to another, we can all work to change the paradigm on gender equality. Decentralized cooperation is a key means to achieve coherent and sustainable change at the global level, and it should be better recognized as such at European and international level. I therefore take advantage of my time to wish REFELA and UCLG Africa great success, because I believe that this charter, like the European one, will promote the implementation of the SDGs, because gender equality must be at the heart of all the SDGs. Thank you for your attention. These few words will help push forward our efforts to achieve a more just, sustainable, and a more resilient world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I please go to the Mayor of San Jose, Johnny Araya?
Un saludo desde San José, Costa Rica, a todas las autoridades de Naciones Unidas que nos acompañan, a los representantes de Cities Alliance, queridos alcaldes y representantes del Global Task Force, Emilia Saiz, secretaria general de la CGLU. Deseo para empezar reiterar los agradecimientos a los coorganizadores de este foro, que es vital para el colectivo de los gobiernos locales y regionales, así como al PNUD y a ONU Habitat por nuestro partenariado. Para aquellos que creemos en la necesidad de una gobernanza compartida, espacios como este son la prueba viva del impacto que pueden tener para alcanzar los ODS y fortalecer su localización. Ha pasado ya más de año y medio desde que el COVID-19 comenzó a causar estragos en el mundo. 18 meses que nos advierten de la necesidad de construir territorios y ciudades resilientes y sostenibles, de la necesidad de reducir las desigualdades en el acceso a los servicios de nuestras comunidades y de que debemos seguir trabajando por transformar nuestra relación con el planeta y la naturaleza y transformando nuestros sistemas también de producción y consumo. Nuestras economías, nuestros territorios aún no son lo suficientemente resilientes ni están lo suficientemente empoderados para proteger a nuestros bienes comunes y a nuestra gente, y especialmente a los más vulnerables. Y su derecho y el derecho de las generaciones futuras a un planeta habitable y saludable. Y es por esto que me enorgullece ver a nuestro colectivo comprometido con la transformación y al sistema internacional reunidos hoy con el objetivo de un foro de gobiernos locales y regionales fortalecidos. La declaración conjunta de nuestro colectivo recoge la necesidad de un sistema multilateral renovado que reconozca a los gobiernos locales y regionales como un motor, como un verdadero motor de transformación para localizar los ODS. Quiero hacerme eco de esta necesidad y afirmar que es la co-creación de la toma de decisiones y con nuestras comunidades y actores locales y con la plena colaboración entre las diferentes esferas de gobierno, la forma de acabar con las desigualdades que se han acrecentado exponencialmente con la pandemia. Y recordar también la amenazante crisis climática que estamos viviendo, que vemos cada día con los récords de temperaturas de las últimas semanas en Canadá y en los Estados Unidos, con fenómenos climáticos cada vez más adversos como las sequías y las inundaciones. Una verdadera transformación ecológica requiere que seamos parte de las decisiones que afectarán a las comunidades que representamos. Debemos aprovechar las conversaciones sobre la recuperación para que el nuevo orden que surja tras el COVID tenga en cuenta también a los productores locales, las cadenas de producción y consumo sostenible y unos sistemas alimentarios pensados para responder a las necesidades de las personas. Hacia la cumbre del clima, la COP26, es vital unirnos a las campañas Race to Zero o Race to Resilience para que la recuperación del COVID sea también la recuperación del planeta y para que el cumplimiento de los acuerdos del clima sea justo con nuestras comunidades. Ante este foro de alto nivel, que he tenido el honor de participar prácticamente en todas las oportunidades, nuestro colectivo debe seguir defendiendo que somos actores esenciales para fomentar la apropiación de este marco transformador de la Agenda 2030 y claves también para lograr que los cambios sociales liderados por las comunidades nos lleven hacia un mundo más sostenible y más justo. Somos sin duda la esfera de gobierno que mejor puede canalizar las aspiraciones de nuestras comunidades. No podemos hacerlo solos y solas. Necesitamos marcos legales que faciliten la co-creación y que permitan a los gobiernos locales y regionales actuar. Necesitamos voz y voto en los debates sobre la recuperación económica y necesitamos que los estímulos financieros para la recuperación económica se otorguen teniendo en cuenta las comunidades locales y el papel de sus gobiernos en la respuesta de las necesidades básicas. Tengan por seguro que nuestro colectivo organizado, las 27 redes de gobiernos locales y regionales reunidas en el Global Task Force, estamos comprometidas con la localización de los ODS y con alcanzar una agenda común planetaria para definir conjuntamente un futuro mejor para todos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I please go to Magnus Berntsson, who's the Regional Minister for the Environment and Vice President of the Regional Council of Västra in Gotland in Sweden.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Excellencies, dear friends across the whole globe. The 2030 Agenda is born out of our collective vision for a more equal and fairer world. Its sustainable development goals are for everyone, everywhere. Now evidence shows that things are not on track. Inequalities are large and growing. If the COVID-19 pandemic has intensified these structural inequalities, the recovery response is a powerful opportunity to move in the transformational direction envisioned in the agenda and create a more inclusive economies and societies. Inequalities are one of the long-standing and hardest issues faced by our regions. And they are bad not only for social cohesion, but also for our economy and democracy. That's why the local and regional governments are committed to continue to champion social inclusion as a way to tackle inequality and build more prosperous, equitable economies. This means continuing our vital role in promoting equal opportunities, to providing essential services and investing in a more targeted policies to ensure better progress for the most excluded members of our societies, including ensuring empowered access to healthcare, education, social welfare, housing, transport, and connectivity. Facing the participation in employment and its positive economic outcomes, promoting gender equality, and managing diversity as a resource for innovation and growth. This is also involving making our regions competitive while ensuring social sustainability through shared prosperity. This is a shared task, so partnership across all levels of government and sectors of society is a key ingredient by which we can achieve a more sustainable and prosperous and fair and also resilient future. In our role, regional governments have been building participatory mechanism for decision-making involving our citizens and stakeholders, including civil society, academia, and business organizations in policy formulation and implementation. Our engagements with these diverse groups of society includes the most excluded, and that allows us to make our policies more efficient and get a more impact on the society, and delivering a better outcome for the communities we aim at to support. An enhanced multi-level governance is also a key enabler of the transformational change we need to meet our objectives of leaving no one behind in the post-pandemic world. Thus, this calls that national governments effectively include and support local and regional governments in implementing their national recovery plans and SDG strategies through structured mechanisms where we can have formal roles and representation. Living up to the Leave No One Behind commits on the 2030 agenda, and that is considerable task, but also a necessary and overdue one. We, regional governments, remain committed to continue our efforts and cooperation with other actors and levels of government in working together to form a greater inclusion, to build back a fairer and fully realized 2030 agenda and its goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go to the Philippines? Mayor of Makati, Abigail Benay, I think you've got your video off. There you are. Over to you, Mayor.
Sorry about my internet's a bit unstable. Anyway, good day to everyone. Social inclusion and shared prosperity have been the guiding principles of the local government of Makati since February 1980, when the EDSA revolution led to a radical shift in the way the city has been governed for decades. Since then, these principles have defined how we plan, how we work, and how we govern. Under my administration, the policies and programs that have actualized these guiding principles have been enhanced and expanded. Being a financial center of the Philippines has provided us the long-term stability we needed to pursue groundbreaking programs in public health, education, employment, and social welfare. It has allowed us to uplift the conditions of the poor, promote greater respect and inclusivity, and address the growing threat of climate change. But promoting social inclusion also requires being inclusive in the crafting of programs and policies. Since 1986, the local government has made it a policy to hold dialogues and consultations with citizens, private sector, and other stakeholders in the crafting of programs, policies, and local legislation. This is a sharp departure from the previous practice, where policies and programs are set almost exclusively by the leadership, with little regard for the concerns of the sectors to be affected. Technology has also had a positive impact on the manner in which we communicate with our constituents and other stakeholders. The many social media platforms available have allowed us to talk directly to our target sectors, engage them, and receive feedback. The onset of the pandemic, which has restricted mobility and face-to-face interaction, has made these platforms indispensable. Over the years, our programs have had a significant impact on the standard of living of our constituents. In the past, Makati was presented as a city where prosperity thrives amidst urban squalor. Today, Makati has the lowest poverty incidence in Metro Manila at 0.2% of the population, according to data from the Philippine Statistics Authority. The national poverty rate is at 16.6%. Achieving the social development goals at the local level requires the of the leaders and stable linkages with the stakeholders. But it would also require resources, which many localities in the Philippines do not have. Makati's situation is unique. We are the country's financial center and home to the top corporations. On the other hand, a considerable number of local governments in the Philippines are classified as fourth class and fifth class municipalities. And it's also in these areas where the incidence of poverty remains high. These local governments have been dealing with fiscal difficulties even before the pandemic. And the pandemic, which has led to the closure of businesses for an extended period and the need to provide assistance to their constituents, has left them with very little resources. Unless they are provided with a lifeline, they face the possibility of cutting back on their services, which would be detrimental to their constituents. This would also impact on their efforts to meet the SDGs. Considering the uncertainties faced by local governments worldwide, I believe we need to explore how local governments can enhance and access assistance. This, for me, is imperative. We are to ensure that prosperity and social inclusion do not become casual. For me, it's imperative if we are to ensure that prosperity and social inclusion do not become casualties of the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. And now we go to Stockholm, to Mayor Anna Koenig-Jermeyer, who's the Mayor of Stockholm.
Thank you. And I think it's really important to have this forum because it's highlight that we must engage all levels and have a multidisciplinary approach when we work together. And we work together towards recovery post-COVID-19 and also a more sustainable 2030. And we must rebuild our cities, and not just better, but fully in line with the ambitions of the SDGs. And the pandemic has ravaged some of the fabric that is global collaboration. But it has also shown how much of our challenges that are intertwined. How climate change, as well as challenges to biodiversity conservation and human rights, all affect our way of life. How local challenges become global threats, and how international trends can have a local impact. However, there is still time, and I truly believe that we, because of the SDG, have a better opportunity to identify mutual challenges and the solution to these challenges. And the agenda make it easier for us to establish a common framework with our other agents for change, such as businesses, civil society organizations, national agencies, and academia. And Stockholm's ambition to take a leading role in implementing the 2030 agenda and the SDG at the local level is high. We encourage our own operation to work more holistic and innovative so that sustainable solutions and human rights can be easy access in everyday life. This is the foundation for a city that truly builds its operation upon all three dimensions of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. And as a mayor, I'm determined to work hard so that Stockholm becomes a resilient city of opportunities where no one is left behind. And this means that reducing inequality is a necessity for achieving the SDG. One example of this is how we work towards gender equality. Stockholm is a city where the gender pay gap is gradually shrinking. However, it's fundamental to increase women's prospect to have the same opportunity as men to enter the labor market. Our operations must ensure a fair distribution of power, influence, and resources between women, men, girls, and boys. And we must work harder to safeguard girls' and women's human rights. A resilient city is also a safe city where you are free from violence regardless of gender. We know, for instance, that women with disabilities have a higher risk of domestic violence and sexual abuse, and we must therefore target our actions to be more inclusive. And another example is how we implement a gender aspect when we plan our streets and city districts, because a place safe for women and children are safe for everyone. Another example that showcases why we must work more holistic is Stockholm's sustainable food system. Every year we buy more than 15,000 tons of food products. And this gives us a great opportunity to influence the entire food system in Stockholm in a more sustainable direction, from farm to fork. Our food strategy makes it clear how we can provide the people of Stockholm with a good, nutritious, and safe food, but also how this should contribute to our goal of becoming a climate positive city in 2040. In both of these examples, we work closely together with businesses and civil society organizations to ensure that we learn from each other while we reinforce each other's strength. CSO have a direct connection to our citizens, while businesses often are the first to innovate and try new sustainable solutions. We are all local parts of the global solutions where resilient cities leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And can we do a quick trip across the Atlantic to Canada, to Mayor Branovich, Mayor of Kitchener?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues, local government friends around the world. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you again this year, although it would be so much better if we were able to gather in person again. Virtual certainly works. The past year has seen local and regional governments at the forefront, not only of the pandemic, but as they've continued to see us at the forefront of the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals through our provision of local public services and management of our territories. Both throughout the pandemic and as we look to building back better, cities and regions are realizing that if we will ensure a recovery that is inclusive, sustainable, and resilient, it'll be key for us to ensure both the maintenance of these services and access to adequate funding post-COVID-19. As I reflect on these issues, I'd like to very briefly look at it from a national, provincial, and a local perspective. While local governments had limited resources to respond to the pandemic, in Canada's case, our response was really predicated on a high level of collaboration between both the federal and provincial governments. With all the adversity related to COVID-19 that impacted our cities, our people, our residents, our businesses, and our organizations, we have collectively all risen to that challenge. From a national perspective, it quickly became apparent that cities were in desperate need to ensure their ongoing financial viability because of the losses that we were incurring in terms of not only responding to COVID-19, but also losses that were being experienced in our transit systems, in our recreational service provision, and in so many other areas. And through the active advocacy of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and our advocacy with both the federal government and in particular the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who was meeting regularly with our big city mayors, as well as with our provincial government, we were able to put in Ontario's case, a $4 billion program that helped ensure that cities had the funding they needed in order to work through the pandemic. From a City of Kitchener point of view, we challenged our community to imagine our Kitchener of the future. And in October of 2020, we approved our Make It Kitchener 2.0 economic development strategy. Even before COVID, Make It Kitchener was intended to be a vision for economic growth for the next decade in our community's development and was intended to align with the Sustainable Development Goals. But while the pandemic delayed the adoption of the strategy, it did focus it on economic recovery and ensuring we built back better and in a way that further advanced our city's commitment to the SDGs as already connected to our city's strategic plan. So what were we doing locally? Well, first of all, one portion or $5 million of a $110 million fund that was attached to this economic development plan had been dedicated to local economic recovery. $1 million to support small businesses and stimulate growth and opportunity, $2 million to support our local service industries, and in particular to support businesses that are women-led, those that were led by racialized communities, as well as those that are led by Indigenous communities. And $1.5 million to partner with our technology and innovation organization to deliver business recovery supports, particularly in the area of health going forward. We also have invested over $10 million into affordable housing as a city to partner with the provincial and federal governments. And our first project there was, in fact, to build a 30 to 50 unit women's supportive housing unit. And this was a partnership between us as the landholder, funding agencies, and operating agencies, in particular the YWCA. And by doing this, we've ensured that those in our community who were most vulnerable and struggling and who saw that exacerbated by the pandemic are able to rely on new supportive housing coming out of the pandemic going forward. So all in all, I think the past year has been filled with adversity. We've had losses and those have been tragic, but we've also seen resilience. As a community, as a region, and as a country, we're prepared to work together so that we can come out of this pandemic stronger than ever and building back better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. So we will now go to two partners. So the first is the National Planning Department of Colombia and the Deputy Director, Daniel Gomez.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Thank you all for inviting and organizing this forum. I'd like to share the experience of Colombia in the recovery process and fostering a recovery that is aligned with SDGs, that is resilient, and particularly emphasize the role of collaboration with local communities to build these policies and to guarantee their implementation. First of all, I'd like to highlight that over the last couple decades, Colombia made remarkable progress in the fight against extreme and moderate poverty. I'm going to focus in my remarks particularly on SDGs 1, 2, and 10, but of course, I think that the SDGs are a guiding light in terms of the structure of these recovery processes and how to guarantee that they don't only respond to short-term goals, but also to a long-term vision of sustainability and inclusion. In the case of Colombia, between 2012 and 2019, the incidence of monetary poverty decreased by 3.7 percentage points. In rural areas, poverty dropped 8.9 percentage points. In 2019, our multidimensional poverty index showed that 17.5% of the population was in a condition of poverty, and this was an improvement of 1.6 percentage points compared with 2018. In other words, 650,000 people overcame conditions of poverty and vulnerability between 2018 2019. 2019 and 2020, as in the rest of the world, represented significant setbacks in terms of our fight against poverty. Between 2019 and 2020, 3.5 million people entered into poverty and 2.8 million people entered extreme poverty in Colombia. This was despite of our best efforts to implement urgent measures to absorb and to mitigate the impact of COVID on poverty. In total, we managed through a set of non-conditional cash transfers, conditional cash transfers, VAT compensation schemes for the poorest households to absorb more or less 60% of the fall in income for the poorest households, 40% for the poor. So instead of having an increase of 10 percentage points in poverty during 2020, we managed to have an increase which was dramatic, nevertheless, of 6 percentage points, but we did manage to prevent 4 percentage points increase in poverty because of these immediate responses. The government's response was not only limited to social policy, we also had an immediate response including households, firms, government actions, and we had aligned with this immediate response a policy of recovery with these criteria of sustainability and inclusion. These policies were designed in collaboration with civil society, with the private sector, with academia, with local governments, with local organizations, and the policy agenda refocused on recovery during 2020. In all of these policies, SDGs are embedded. They are absolutely aligned with our national planning and our national planning department goals, and as well as our national development plan. The long-term goals of sustainability and inclusion with a special focus on local governments is particularly important. We're now implementing this policy, and the institutional response included all of these social programs as well as support for formal employment with a gender focus. This was very important, as others have said, the differential impact of COVID on the youth, on women in labor markets has been very significant. As for SDG 2, it is worth noting that understanding the importance of nutrition in early childhood and the objectives of reducing mortality rates were important before COVID, but they were even more important after COVID because we want to protect human capital, which is one of the mechanisms by which the short-term impact of COVID can translate into longer-term effects on social mobility, on the fight against poverty. From the beginning of this administration, from the National Development Plan of 2018, we launched a work plan against child malnutrition, and this has been reinforced during COVID to prevent vulnerable children from vulnerable households to fall again into poverty and to have long-lasting effects. The World Food Program, together with the First Lady, launched the project Innovation for Nutrition, aimed at promoting innovative solutions on food security and nutrition. We think that this will accelerate the target defined by SDG 2, not only in Colombia, but also in Latin America and the Caribbean. This multi-stakeholder initiative seeks to generate new approaches around nutrition and food security through innovative solutions that empower vulnerable populations with an emphasis on women, youth, and ethnic communities. In terms of of the impact on labor markets. We've seen that both with the sectors where women had higher participation, as well as the burden on women of housework, represented a very differential impact in terms of higher unemployment rates for women as compared to men. The government has included gender perspectives in all the recovery process, including support for formal employment with an extra incentive for women. And we're now working on gender equality policies, as well as household work policies that recognize the time used and the time spent by women caring for children, caring for the elderly, and caring for their households. Provision of basic education services, and in particular for migrant populations, has also been an emphasis. I think that recovering educational systems, educational trajectories has been key in our recovery process. This is one of the big challenges in terms of our work with school teachers, with local governments, and it will be key not only to secure the human capital of this generation, to secure social mobility during the next 10, 20 years, but also for immediate recovery as different sectors involved with the educational sector are recovered and start working again. All of these issues have to do with leaving no one behind and reducing inequalities. SDG 10 has to be our main framework in terms of alleviating all the social tensions that have arisen because of COVID. Reducing inequality in Colombia requires tackling both structural conditions as well as implementing short-term strategies. Colombia, I think, has built a very innovative and modern social security system. We are reinforcing it, including conditional and non-conditional cash transfers, subsidies to the elderly, compensation of taxes on consumption, free access to tertiary education, among many other efforts to understand and to improve the workings of the labor market during this recovery period. So lots of challenges ahead, but I think that COVID was in Colombia and the rest of the world also an alarm bell and an opportunity to improve public policy and to recognize the urgency of the SDGs and to really be on track for this decade of achievement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. So for our final speaker, we'll go to the co-chair of the major groups and other stakeholders coordination mechanism, Mabel Bianco.
Hello, thank you so much. And I'm also speaking, on behalf, because I'm coming from the Women Mayor Group, and also I'm a facilitator of the civil society and other stakeholder participation at regional level. So I'm having expressed more about the general global, but also the regional perspective. First of all, I want to say that to solve and to be solving the devastating process that the COVID-19 makes in the development, sustainable development, we need really to make changes. If we are always coming with the same levels of giving interventions, we are not going to be able. We need to have innovative ways. Why? Because the decrease was so high, not only on women and girls, but in all the population. In general, as you know, our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, is the more unequal region. This is something that increased, the inequalities increased by the COVID. So now we have more poor people, and particularly among women, children, and young people. So we need to be clear that if we are not considering those people and those answers to them, and this is what we want to say, those inequalities persist to the COVID. But now that they are so strong, we need to address them. To address them, we need to take care of the systemic barriers that make the inequalities there. And if we talk about the access of women and young people to work, to decent work, we must say that the decrease during this half a year and a half was as 10 years, as we come back as it was 10 years ago. So we need to be very, very new addressing and making this. And as you know, our populations in Latin America and the Caribbean makes a lot of demonstrations about these inequalities, how they feel that they need to be addressed. So it's very important that we have a more balance in the participation of civil society. And when we say, don't leave anyone behind, we say no one. So we need to include those that they used to be marginalized and that now are more marginalized. And this is the poor people, these are the indigenous, these are the women, these are the collective of LGBTQI, the students, and so on. So we need the governments to be open to that and not to persecute that people, and of course, not persecute those that we are not having the same ideas, because this is the great problem. So we want to have this commitment, and we consider the local governments are the great place to where we can be more active and more related and be more able to develop joint activities. For this, the federal governments need to allow them, and so we want also to have this reflect in the global level, because at global level sometimes we are looking only to the general issues and not considering the difference that the people, real people, express, live, and experience. So this is something that what I'm so happy to have the opportunity to speak to you now in order to say we need to strengthen our collaboration. But to strengthen our collaborations means to respect each other. To respect each other is to give us the possibility to speak, not being persecuted, not be eliminated, and of course, share the differences, because the difference needs to be approached in a way that could be solved. This is what we request from governments at global, regional, and local level, and we hope this could be expressed in the ministerial declaration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mabel. So thank you to all the panelists. I mean, your insights and experiences are valuable, and I think we've all learned listening to you. I mean, there's a couple of points I just want to make just before I hand over to Lucy, and that is, so I mean, one of the speakers actually said that having inclusion and having equality is not a nice to have. It's actually bad for your economy, and it's bad for your society, and it's bad for your democracy if you don't have it. So it's not a nice to have. And we're talking about social inclusion and shared prosperity. So we're not talking about social inclusion, but they stay poor, that people stay poor. So it's about shared prosperity as well. And a lot of you have mentioned the issue around political empowerment, but specifically in women, and empowering women politically and economically as one of the routes to getting better social inclusion and better equality. And then how do we do this? All of you have spoken about working together across regions, across sectors, across local governments, but also with communities and the people who are excluded, working with and together with them. And the last speaker, Mabel, you've really made that point. And I think it was Mayor Arroyo who used the word that it's one of my favorite words recently. He used the word co-creation. that each of us individually cannot get social inclusion and equality. But if we work and find solutions together with our communities at its heart, we can find solutions and we can move this. And this speaks very much to the agenda of Cities Alliance. We work with the urban poor, we work for inclusion of the marginalized and the poor in getting solutions and creating social inclusion and equality. So thank you to all of you. It was music to my ears to facilitate the session. So thank you, Amelia, for allowing me to do so. So I would like to hand over to someone I know fairly well. So Lucy Slack is the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, who I had the privilege of working with for many years. But Lucy's going to do the wrap up of the last few hours. Lucy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you very much to all of the contributors who've spoken in this session. I think I have a few kind of points that I've just jotted down, particularly interconnectedness and how interconnected we all are. And I think also the important link between public services and health, which came through extremely strongly in the first panel. I think we focus a lot around resilience and the need to build resilient communities, as Greg has just said. And then many of our speakers have talked about the challenge of resources, capability and capacity. And then finally around the need to capitalize on digitalization. And I think really what we want to talk about a little bit in this closing session is what we do next and how we actually bring this global conversation into some really targeted recommendations for the kind of action that we want to see. I think we recognize that the Global Task Force brings together a diverse group of partners, a diverse group of actors. And I think in many ways that has been absolutely our strength going forward. I think in the opening of this meeting, we heard very strong endorsement from various UN agencies around the need to work much more closely with our constituency. And that is absolutely as a result of the hard work that you've all kind of contributed towards making our global movement a strong one. And I think before I go on to talk a little bit about the statement that we have issued as the Global Task Force, I just wanted to remember the words of Mayor Gelmeyer, who said, you know, we're local parts of a global solution. And in many ways, I hope that you'll see this statement that we're now about to present to the high-level political forum as something which captures the breadth and the diversity and the varied nature of the points that colleagues today have made around the table. So I just very, very quickly want to run you through some of our asks in the statement. And the statement has a lot of contextual information and background information, but I think we're calling on 11 key changes, 11 things that we as the Global Task Force feel are going to be critical for us moving forward. So the first will come as no surprise is to call for strengthening health services and universal vaccinations for all. So bolstering multi-sector, multi-stakeholder governance of the international system to respond to emergencies. We're also calling for the uninterrupted support of all spheres of government in ensuring health and human rights protection. All of those issues we've talked about today around inclusivity being an absolute right for everyone, and especially to the most marginalized and already structurally disadvantaged parts of our populations, including migrants and displaced persons. We're calling on the HLPF to be more in line with the Paris Agreement and the IPCC findings for all efforts in the recovery to be geared towards delivering a green and just recovery, and thus also contribute towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions in order to keep global warming to the 1.5% target. And then we call to associate local and regional governments in the definition and implementation of the recovery packages to ensure a safe, green and just recovery, and I would include in that also a resilient recovery, unlocking the means of implementation for local and regional governments to allow an equal, inclusive and sustainable recovery as strategic sectors to achieve the SDGs. And that's something that has resonated across our discussions today. And then we call on the international systems and national governments to promote the necessary reforms to strengthen the role and resources of local and regional governments. So empowered local and regional governments are necessary with adequate regulatory frameworks that encourage the alignment of national and territorial plans with the SDGs to ensure universal access to quality public services. And I feel very strongly that this phraseology around empowered local and regional governments must include regional and local governments that have the necessary resources to play that role fully in ensuring that our communities are able to build a sustainable and a resilient recovery. I'm stopping at that point, and I'm going to hand over to Emilia to kind of complete and take us through the final part of the statement. Emilia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Indeed, I will carry on with these asks. Our statement has two parts, one where we express all of our commitments. You have heard this from the elected officials that have been participating today, and we thought it was appropriate to run you through the asks indeed. We call to guarantee access and participation in cultural life as an antidote to all crises, and to acknowledge the essential role that culture has in the recovery for the communities, and the power that it can trigger for social justice, freedoms, innovation, and global fraternity. We also call for the recognition of the new urban agenda as an integral part of our response to COVID-19, but also as a very important trigger to achieve the SDGs. It will not be possible to achieve the SDGs, to localize them, if we don't put in place the new urban agenda, if we don't implement it adequately. We also call on the high-level political forum to recognize the critical role that migration plays towards sustainable development, and call all member states to join local governments to develop and implement policy measures that uphold the human rights of migrants and recognize the linkages between climate change, human mobility, and urbanization, identifying common action. And this new and more positive narrative around human mobility is very critical to our constituency that considers migrants not as statistics, not as numbers, but actually as neighbors. We call for the involvement of local and regional governments in the voluntary national review processes, and we call for the recognition of voluntary local reviews and voluntary subnational reviews as part of the monitoring and reporting processes, and also as part of the deliberations of the high-level political forum. And finally, we call for a system in which local governments are fully engaged, and you have heard many of our speakers calling for that. We'll stop here. You have an organized local and regional governments constituency that is ready to complement national and global action. And I just want to finish this first day of our local and regional governments forum that we feel very proud about, with listing to you the organizations that are behind the Global Task Force: UCLG, CLGF, IMF, ATO, ICLEI, Regions 4, Mercociudades, FLAGMA, CMR, UCLG Euroasia, Metropolis, UCLG Regions, UCLG ASPAC, UCLG MEWA, FMDB, UCLG Africa, UCSI, Orufogar, Platforma, C40, Cités Unis France, ALAS, AER, the Global Parliament of Mayors, the Mayors Migration Council, and Resilient Cities Network. All of us are the Global Task Force, and we're truly grateful for the commitment of our elected officials, and also for the support of UN Habitat, UN ECOSOC, UNDP, Local 2030, and UNDESA. Thank you very much, everybody. See you tomorrow. More to come. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy, for sharing the burden.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hasta luego a todos. Hasta luego.
Gracias, presidente. Join us tomorrow again, please. Bye.